After 20 years of apartment living, I had finally saved enough for my dream home. Sunridge Estates was everything I had hoped for: pristine lawns, friendly neighbors, and most importantly, a backyard with a swimming pool. The water sparkled blue under the clear sky as I dipped my feet in for the first time as a homeowner. This moment represented years of overtime shifts, careful budgeting, and patience. The peaceful neighborhood seemed worth every penny and sacrifice. My Uncle Frank had been sheriff of Riversdale County for nearly 30 years, and his advice had guided me toward this particular community. He knew the area well, spoke highly of the safety statistics, and mentioned that several retired officers lived nearby. What he failed to mention was the Homeowners Association and their infamous rule book. The day after moving in, a thick white binder appeared on my doorstep with Sunridge Estates community guidelines, embossed in gold letters. 372 pages of regulations, restrictions, and requirements. Grass height specifications, approved mailbox designs, permitted exterior paint colors, and an entire section devoted to pool maintenance standards. I flipped through it, bewildered by the microscopic level of control but determined to be a good neighbor. Most residents welcomed me warmly. The Patels brought homemade samosas. The Johnsons offered to show me the best local grocery stores. The elderly couple across the street, the Hendersons, brought a potted plant with a card sharing their phone number, just in case. Everyone seemed relaxed despite living under such strict regulations. Everyone except Patricia Winters. As HOA board treasurer, she introduced herself with a business card rather than a smile. Her eyes swept over my property with the precision of a building inspector. "We maintain certain standards here," she informed me, her gaze lingering on my welcome mat, which apparently was 2 inches wider than regulation size. I noticed her watching from her window frequently during my first week. When I installed solar-powered lights along my garden path, she photographed the installation from across the street. I waved, but she disappeared behind her curtains. Something about me had clearly attracted her attention. 2 weeks into my residence, the first violation notice appeared in my mailbox. Improper storage of garden hose must be concealed or stored when not in active use. Fine waived for first offense. The letter was signed by Patricia as enforcement officer. I dutifully purchased a hose reel that same day, installed it, and thought little more about it. That weekend, I started planning a special gathering. My Uncle Frank was retiring after 3 decades of service, and I wanted to do something memorable for him. As I sketched ideas for using my backyard space, I had no idea that my simple act of hospitality would soon place me squarely in Patricia's crosshairs, or that it would lead to the most memorable neighborhood incident Sunridge Estates had ever witnessed. The Corner Cafe downtown had been my Uncle Frank's breakfast spot for decades. Every Tuesday at 8:00 a.m. sharp, he ordered the same meal: 2 eggs over easy wheat toast, black coffee. The waitresses knew him by name, and he knew their children's names and school accomplishments. As county sheriff, Frank believed community connection was as important as enforcement. I slid into the booth across from him, noticing new lines etched around his eyes. 30 years of service had taken its toll. His uniform looked crisp as always, badge gleaming under the diner lights, but his shoulders seemed heavier than usual. "So the countdown begins," I said, watching him doctor his coffee with precisely 1 packet of sugar. "3 more weeks on the job. How does it feel?" Frank stared into his mug for a long moment. "Strange," he finally answered. "I have spent more time in this uniform than out of it. Some mornings I wake up reaching for the badge before my eyes are even open." He paused, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Yesterday I cleaned out my desk drawer, found my first citation book from 1993, still had 3 unused tickets." The waitress delivered our food, calling Frank Sheriff with genuine affection. He thanked her by name and asked about her son's baseball tournament. This was who my uncle was, a man who carried authority lightly but took responsibility seriously. "The department must be planning something big for your retirement," I said between bites. "3 decades deserves a proper send-off." His expression shifted subtly. "Budget cuts," he explained, shrugging slightly. "The county commissioner slashed the community engagement fund last quarter. Johnson, you remember my deputy chief, he offered to host something at his place, but his wife is having knee surgery that week." He waved his hand dismissively. "It is not important, just another day on the calendar." But I could see it was important. Fra NK had devoted his life to serving this community. The idea of him slipping quietly into retirement without proper recognition felt deeply wrong. "What about my place?" The words tumbled out before I had fully considered them. "I have that big backyard, the pool. We could set up tables, get some catering. Nothing fancy, but a proper gathering for everyone to say goodbye." Frank lowered his fork. "That is a generous offer, but I could not ask you to do that. You just moved in." "You are not asking, I am offering." My mind was already racing with possibilities. The yard is perfect for it, and honestly, it would help me meet people in the community too. Frank studied my face, looking for signs of reluctance. Finding none, the weight seemed to lift slightly from his shoulders. There would be quite a few people. Officers, county officials, community members I have worked with over the years. "Even better," I assured him. "My house could use some life in it. Let me do this for you." As our conversation continued, we mapped out potential dates, rough guest counts, and catering options. Frank's spirits visibly brightened as he mentioned colleagues who would attend. For the first time since announcing his retirement, he seemed genuinely excited about this transition in his life. When we parted outside the diner, his handshake turned into a rare hug. "Thank you," he said simply. "This means more than you know." Walking to my car, I felt my phone vibrate. A notification from the Sunridge Estates HOA app glowed on my screen. "Remember, all gatherings exceeding 10 persons require advance board approval. See Community Guidelines section 47.3. I glanced up and froze. Across the street, sitting in a silver sedan with a clear view of the diner entrance, was Patricia Winters. Her eyes met mine briefly before she started her car and drove away. My stomach tightened with unease. As I drove home, I realized the simple act of hosting my uncle's retirement party might be more complicated than I had anticipated. The morning light painted Sunridge Estates in postcard perfection. I stood in my driveway, watering newly planted flowers, when a silver sedan cruised by at precisely 15 miles per hour. Behind the wheel, Patricia Winters did not bother hiding her scrutiny. Her head turned deliberately to examine my property as she passed. This marked her third drive-by that week. I raised my hand in a neighborly wave. Patricia stared straight ahead, pretending not to notice. The sedan continued down the street, turned at the cul-de-sac, and disappeared around the corner. I sighed and returned to my gardening. Later that day, while collecting my mail, I encountered George Henderson, the retired high school principal from across the street. "Getting settled in all right?" he asked kindly. "Mostly," I replied. "Still learning all the HOA rules. That handbook is quite thorough." George chuckled without humor. "That is one way to put it. I see Patricia has already taken an interest in your property." I paused. "Is that normal? She seems to drive by several times a day." George glanced over his shoulder before leaning closer. "That woman has nothing better to do than enforce rules. Last year, the Thompsons installed a basketball hoop for their kids. Patricia measured its height. It was 2 inches too tall. Had it removed while they were at church on Sunday. You are kidding. Wish I was. She forced the Garcias to repaint their front door because the shade of blue was unapproved. Cost them nearly $500. And the Miller family, their teenage son parked his car in their driveway overnight, apparently a violation. She had it towed. The boy had to pay $200 to get it back. Other neighbors joined the conversation, each with their own Patricia story. The consensus was clear. She derived satisfaction from catching violations and enforcing penalties. Her position as board treasurer gave her authority to issue warning notices, and she exercised this power liberally. Just keep your head down, advised Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 doors down. Do not give her any ammunition. That afternoon, I found a second violation notice taped to my door. Unauthorized landscaping modification. Planting requires prior approval per section 63.2. Warning issued. The flowers I had planted that morning were apparently a community offense. Frustrated but determined to resolve the situation amicably, I decided to speak with Patricia directly. I found her inspecting the community mailboxes with a measuring tape. Good afternoon, Patricia, I said pleasantly. I received your notice about my flowers. I was hoping we could talk about it. She straightened, slipping the measuring tape into her pocket. The guidelines are clear. All landscape modifications require prior written approval. I understand that now. I am still learning the rules. Perhaps we could start fresh. I am planning a small gathering for my uncle's ready. Remnant in a few weeks. He has been county sheriff for 30 years. I would love for you to attend, meet some community leaders. Patricia's expression remained unchanged. Gatherings exceeding 10 persons require board notification 14 days in advance. Noise restrictions apply after 7:00 p.m. Guest parking cannot obstruct any portion of the sidewalk or extend beyond the boundaries of your property. She reached into her handbag and withdrew several printed pages. Here are the relevant sections from the community guidelines. Please review them carefully. I accepted the papers, momentarily speechless at her complete rejection of my friendly overture. Also, she continued, inflatable decorations are prohibited, as are temporary structures including tents. Amplified music requires special permission. Swimming pool use by non-residents must comply with the guest limitations in Section 94.1. Thank you for the information, I managed, forcing politeness into my voice. I will be sure to follow all guidelines. Patricia nodded curtly. See that you do. We take our community standards very seriously at Sunridge Estates. The following day, a formal letter arrived outlining specific restrictions for residential gatherings. Each bullet point seemed targeted at exactly what a retirement party might entail. The letter concluded with a reminder that violations could result in fines starting at $250 per offense. That evening, I spread my party planning materials across the kitchen table. The HOA warning letters sat in a small pile nearby. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Frank. Just confirmed 20 officers will attend. Everyone is looking forward to it. I stared at the constraints and the guest list, seemingly incompatible. For a moment, I considered canceling. Then I recalled the look on my uncle's face when I had offered to host, how the weariness had momentarily lifted. He deserved this recognition after dedicating his life to public service. I began creating a detailed plan for the event, determined to thread the needle between HOA compliance and a proper celebration. Patricia Winters would be watching for any misstep, but I would not give her the satisfaction of derailing this important day. My kitchen transformed into command central as the party date approached. Calendar, guest list, and detailed timeline covered the refrigerator. Police-themed decorations in blue and gold, tasteful, not gaudy, lay organized on the dining table. The three-page checklist included everything from food arrangements to parking logistics. Every detail required planning to stay within HOA guidelines while still creating a memorable event. The noise ordinance specified 60 decibels maximum after 7:00 p.m., about the volume of normal conversation. I purchased a decibel meter app to monitor sound levels. For parking, I created a detailed map showing designated spots that would not violate street regulations. My strategy included transparent communication with neighbors. Armed with homemade cookies as peace offerings, I visited each house on my street to personally inform them about the upcoming gathering. "It is for my uncle's retirement," I explained to the Martinez family. "He has been sheriff for 3 decades. The party will end by 9, and I will make sure noise stays reasonable." Most neighbors responded with genuine enthusiasm. "The sheriff! Oh, we would love to meet him," Mrs. Rodriguez exclaimed. "My husband was helped by one of his deputies last year when his car broke down. Such good people." The Patels offered their driveway for additional parking. The Johnsons volunteered to bring extra chairs. Even the Hendersons, initially concerned about noise disturbing their early bedtime, warmed to the idea when learning about Frank's service record. Only 2 houses remained unreceptive: Patricia's, where no one answered despite her car being present, and the vacant house next to hers, recently purchased but not yet occupied. Throughout my neighbor visits, I noticed Patricia's curtains moving slightly, tracking my progress down the street. Later that afternoon, a silver sedan drove past my house 3 times in 1 hour. The tension escalated when invitations went out to the sheriff's department, county officials, and community leaders. Frank sent me the final guest list, 47 names in total. Each name represented someone whose life had intersected with my uncle's career, from the mayor to the courthouse security guard who had worked alongside Frank for 25 years. 3 days before the event, while arranging rental tables in my backyard, I noticed Patricia standing at the edge of her driveway, photographing my property with her smartphone. Our eyes met briefly. Instead of looking away embarrassed, she deliberately took another photo before walking back inside. That evening, a certified letter arrived from the HOA. Final notice, upcoming gathering restrictions, detailed 17 specific regulations, each highlighted in yellow. The final paragraph stated, "Violations will be documented and fines assessed without further warning. Multiple infractions may result in lien proceedings." The morning before the party, I made final preparations. Catering delivery was scheduled for noon. The pool had been professionally cleaned, water sparkling invitingly. String lights hung from the patio cover, creating a warm ambience without exceeding brightening regulations. Tables were arranged to maximize space while keeping conversation areas intimate. Standing in my backyard, I surveyed the transformation with satisfaction. Despite Patricia's intimidation tactics, everything was ready. The gathering would honor my uncle while technically complying with every reasonable HOA guideline. As sunset approached, I heard the distinctive click of a camera shutter. Patricia stood at the property line, documenting my setup with her phone. This time, she made no attempt to hide her actions. "Good evening, Patricia," I called, determined to maintain civility. "Beautiful night, is not it? Your string lights exceed the permitted lumens for exterior residential lighting." she replied without greeting. "And your tables are positioned too close to the property line. Section 84.2 requires a minimum 6-foot clearance." Before I could respond, she turned and walked briskly back to her house. Through her front window, I watched her make a phone call, gesturing animatedly toward my property. The confrontation left me uneasy, but I refused to be intimidated. Tomorrow would be about celebrating my uncle's service, not navigating petty power plays. I adjusted the tables to ensure exact 6-foot clearance and dimmed the string lights slightly. Let Patricia document all she wanted. This party would proceed, and it would be perfect. Saturday arrived with cloudless blue skies and perfect temperature, 75 degrees with a gentle breeze. If I believed in signs, this weather would certainly qualify as a good omen. The caterers arrived precisely at noon, efficiently setting up their stations around the yard. The cake, designed to resemble my uncle's sheriff badge, took center position on the dessert table. By 2 o'clock, everything was ready. Tables arranged with blue and gold linens, a photo display chronicling Frank's 30 years of service, a guest book for attendees to share memories. The pool glistened in the sunlight, its surface occasionally rippled by the breeze. The first guests arrived at 2:30, Deputy Chief Johnson and his wife. "This is absolutely wonderful," Mrs. Johnson exclaimed, surveying the backyard. "Frank deserves this kind of send-off." More guests followed quickly. Judge Martinez, who had worked with Frank on countless cases, the county commissioner, the dispatcher who had been the voice on Frank's radio for 20 years. Each arrival brought enthusiastic greetings and stories about my uncle. I carefully directed everyone to designated parking areas, ensuring no vehicles blocked driveways or impeded traffic flow. Several off-duty deputies volunteered as informal valets, helping maintain orderly parking arrangements. At 3:15, Frank arrived. He paused at the gate to my backyard, visibly moved by the gathering. 30 years of colleagues, friends, and community members, all there to honor his service. Someone started applauding, and others quickly joined in. The spontaneous ovation lasted nearly a minute. "I did not expect all this," he said quietly as I welcomed him. His eyes glistened slightly. "Thank you." The party found its rhythm naturally. Conversations flowed easily among people connected by years of shared service. The volume remained reasonable. Background music provided atmosphere without overwhelming conversation. Food and drinks circulated. Laughter occasionally rose above the general murmur. From my position near the refreshment table, I had a clear view of Patricia's house across the street. She had been watching from her window since the first guests arrived. Every 15 minutes or so, she emerged onto her porch, phone in hand, documenting the gathering. "Is there a problem with your neighbor?" asked Captain Rodriguez, noticing my distraction. "HOA board member," I explained. "She has been issuing warnings since I moved in. Seems particularly interested in finding violations today." Rodriguez shook his head. "Some people need to feel important by controlling others. Frank dealt with that type throughout his career." Speaking of Frank, my uncle was in his element. Though never one to seek the spotlight, he moved through the gathering with genuine appreciation, reconnecting with colleagues and friends. The weight that had been present in the diner weeks ago had lifted from his shoulders. At 4:30, Patricia emerged from her house again, this time with purpose in her stride. Phone pressed to her ear, she paced her driveway, gesturing repeatedly toward my property. Her voice, not audible from this distance, had the unmistakable cadence of complaint. I refocused on hosting duties, determined not to let her behavior affect the celebration. Mayor Wilson had just arrived and was sharing a story about Frank's first year as sheriff. The gathered crowd laughed appreciatively at the punchline. At 5:15, the caterers refreshed the food stations. Children of various deputies played a supervised game in one corner of the yard. Several retired officers reminisced near the pool, occasionally calling Frank over to verify details of shared memories. The atmosphere was exactly what I had hoped for, respectful but not somber, celebratory but not chaotic. The noise level remained well within guidelines. The parking arrangement functioned smoothly. Even with nearly 50 people present, the gathering felt organized and considerate. At 5:40, everything changed. The distinctive sound of police sirens cut through the afternoon air. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the street, where two patrol cars with flashing lights pulled up in front of my house. Frank looked at me questioningly. I shook my head, equally confused. We had both assumed any officers attending would be off-duty, arriving in personal vehicles. Across the street, Patricia stood at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed in apparent satisfaction. As the first officer emerged from his vehicle, she immediately approached him, pointing emphatically toward my backyard. The party guests parted as Frank and I made our way to the front yard. The celebrating officers exchanged confused glances. Was this an emergency? Had something happened requiring immediate police response? "I called them," Patricia announced loudly as Frank and I approached. "This gathering violates multiple HOA regulations, noise ordinance, parking restrictions, occupancy limitations." She thrust her phone forward, displaying photos she had been taking throughout the afternoon. "I have documented everything." The officer, young, perhaps in his mid-twenties, looked uncomfortably between Patricia and our gathering. His nameplate read Officer Davis. "Ma'am, we received a noise complaint," he said professionally. "Standard procedure requires us to investigate." Patricia nodded vigorously. The HOA guidelines clearly state maximum noise levels of 60 decibels. This party has been exceeding that limit for hours. And look at all these cars, clearly violating street parking regulations. Officer Davis glanced toward the second patrol car, where his partner was emerging. The tension in the air was palpable. My wonderful celebration for Frank was about to become an embarrassing confrontation. Officer Davis shifted his weight uncertainly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The second officer approached, older, with sergeant stripes on his uniform. Before either could speak, the back doors of both patrol cars opened simultaneously. 4 officers in civilian clothes emerged, carrying wrapped gifts and wearing broad smiles. One called out, "Are we late to the party, Sheriff?" Another added, "We brought the department gift. Did we miss the speech?" Patricia stared in confusion. These were clearly not responding officers, but party guests arriving fashionably late. "Thompson, Garcia," Frank stepped forward, greeting the new arrivals with handshakes. "You made it, and in style, I see." Officer Davis suddenly straightened to attention, recognition dawning on his face. "Sheriff Blake, sir, I did not realize this was your event." Patricia interjected sharply, "That is irrelevant. These people are violating noise ordinances and parking regulations. I want them cited immediately." The older sergeant studied Patricia with professional detachment. "Ma'am, I am Sergeant Martinez. We received your complaint about noise. Standard procedure is to measure decibel levels first." He produced a small device from his belt. "Mind if we check?" Without waiting for her response, he activated the meter. After 30 seconds, he showed the display to Officer Davis. 54 decibels, well within county noise ordinance limits. The HOA guidelines specify, Patricia began. County ordinances supersede HOA guidelines on noise restrictions, Sergeant Martinez stated matter-of-factly. As for parking violations, I do not see any vehicles blocking fire hydrants, driveways, or impeding traffic flow. No ticketable offenses present. Patricia's face flushed with anger. I want to speak to your supervisor, immediately. That would be me, announced a deep voice from behind us. A tall man in dress uniform approached from a recently arrived unmarked car. Chief Wilson, County Police Department. I believe I was invited to this gathering. He nodded respectfully to Frank. Sorry I am late, Sheriff. Budget meeting ran long. Patricia stood momentarily speechless, her certainty visibly faltering. The growing collection of law enforcement officials, both formed and in civilian clothes, clearly unsettled her, but she quickly recovered. This gathering does not have proper permits, she insisted, brandishing her HOA handbook. Section 47.3 clearly states that all gatherings exceeding 10 persons require advance board approval, and Section 94.1 prohibits pool use by more than 6 non-resident guests simultaneously. By now, several party guests had drifted toward the confrontation. Deputy Chief Johnson stepped forward. Ma'am, I am confused. Is this a public park requiring permits or private residential property? It is a covenant-controlled community, Patricia replied stiffly. Homeowners agree to abide by certain restrictions when they purchase property here. Chief Wilson raised an eyebrow. And those restrictions include limiting how many friends can swim in a private pool. Before Patricia could respond, a sleek black SUV pulled up. The county commissioner emerged, followed by the district attorney, both in elegant attire clearly intended for a celebration. What is happening out here, Frank? The commissioner called. Are we missing the party? Patricia's frustration visibly mounted. She turned back to Officer Davis, who had remained professional but increasingly uncomfortable. I insist that you do your duty and shut down this unauthorized gathering. Frank stepped forward, his manner calm but authoritative, the demeanor that had served him well through 3 decades of law enforcement. Patricia, I understand you are concerned about community guidelines, but perhaps we should discuss this reasonably. These officers are not here on duty. Most are my colleagues coming to wish me well in retirement. Then I demand to speak with actual on-duty officers, Patricia nearly shouted, real authorities who will enforce the rules. A profound silence fell over the gathered crowd. Patricia stood surrounded by the highest-ranking law enforcement officials in the county, the sheriff, police chief, district attorney, and multiple command officers, yet was demanding real authorities. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Several officers exchanged glances, fighting to maintain professional composure. Ma'am, Chief Wilson said evenly, perhaps you should reconsider your position. You are currently addressing the county's entire law enforcement leadership. If you have legitimate concerns about public safety, we are certainly equipped to address them. But if this is merely about HOA guidelines— These are not merely guidelines, Patricia interrupted, holding up her handbook. These are binding covenants. I have the authority to issue fines for violations. And I have the authority to interpret county ordinances, countered the district attorney, stepping forward, several of which protect homeowners from overreach by homeowners associations. He smiled pleasantly. Would you like me to elaborate on those protections? I did teach property law before entering public service. Patricia glanced around, suddenly aware that neighbors had emerged from surrounding homes, drawn by the police lights and growing crowd in the street. Her position of authority was eroding with each passing moment. "This is not over," she stated firmly. "The HOA board will address these violations formally." Frank sighed. "Patricia, you are welcome to join the celebration. My retirement party seems to have spilled onto the front lawn thanks to this misunderstanding. There is plenty of food, and I would be happy to introduce you to our community leaders." The invitation, gracious and conciliatory, hung in the air between them. Patricia's expression flickered briefly, perhaps recognizing the olive branch being extended, but her next words eliminated any possibility of reconciliation. "I do not associate with rule breakers," she declared coldly. "Expect formal citations from the board tomorrow." With that, she turned and marched back toward her house, rigid with indignation. The gathered crowd watched her retreat in silence. After a moment, Frank turned to the assembled guests with a rueful smile. "Well, I believe we were in the middle of a celebration. Shall we continue?" As we made our way back to the backyard, the tension gradually dissipated. The confrontation had been unpleasant, but somehow it had united the guests even more strongly in honoring Frank's service. The party resumed with renewed energy, a shared experience now binding attendees together. The celebration continued as twilight descended over Sunridge Estates. String lights glowed softly around the yard, creating an atmosphere of warmth and camaraderie. The confrontation with Patricia had become a topic of good-natured conversation among guests. 30 years dealing with actual criminals," Deputy Thompson laughed, "and your biggest challenge ends up being an HOA board member." Frank smiled diplomatically. "Everyone has their purpose. Some people just take their responsibilities very seriously." Around S. Roman 9:30, an unexpected development occurred. A group of 3 people approached hesitantly from the street, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in business casual attire. The woman stepped forward. "I am Susan Reynolds, HOA board president," she introduced herself. "These are board members David Chen and Michael Fernandez. We received several calls about a disturbance involving Patricia Winters." Frank immediately extended his hand. "Frank Blake, this is my retirement celebration. My nephew is hosting." I stepped forward to introduce myself. We tried to ensure compliance with all reasonable guidelines. If there have been any issues. Susan raised her hand. "Actually, we are here to apologize. Patricia does not speak for the entire board. When we heard police had been called." She surveyed the gathering of law enforcement officials with evident embarrassment. "We received a complaint," Sergeant Martinez explained professionally. "Upon investigation, we found no violations of county ordinances." Board member Chen shook his head. "Patricia has been increasingly aggressive about enforcement recently. We have received several complaints from residents." "The board never authorized the warning notices she sent you," Susan added, turning to me. "She acted independently, which violates our own procedures." This revelation rippled through the nearby guests. The citations, the threats, the harassment, all unauthorized. "We would like to stay if that is acceptable," Susan continued. "We should get to know our community better, especially its distinguished residents." She nodded respectfully toward Frank. The 3 board members were quickly integrated into the celebration. Susan proved to be knowledgeable about county affairs, engaging easily with the commissioner. Chen found common ground with several deputies over their shared military backgrounds. Fernandez discovered he and the district attorney had attended the same law school. As the evening progressed toward its conclusion, Frank requested everyone's attention for a brief speech. Guests gathered around the pool, glasses raised in anticipation. 30 years ago, he began, I took an oath to protect and serve this community. That service was never about enforcing rules for their own sake. It was about building the kind of community where people look out for each other. He gestured around the gathering. This is what community looks like, people from all walks of life coming together. Some wear uniforms, some do not. Some make laws, some enforce them, some interpret them. But all of us share responsibility for creating the place we want to live. His gaze moved meaningfully to the HOA board members. Sometimes we need guidelines to maintain order, but we should never forget that rules exist to serve people. People do not exist to serve rules. The applause was genuine and sustained. As it faded, Susan stepped forward. On behalf of the Sunridge Estates Board, I would like to formally invite Sheriff Blake to our next community meeting. Perhaps you could share your perspective on building community while maintaining standards. We clearly have something to learn from your approach. As the party wound down, guests departed with handshakes and promises to stay connected. By 9 o'clock, only a few remained, helping with cleanup. The evening had been an unqualified success, though not in the way anyone had anticipated. 2 weeks later, the Sunridge Estates newsletter arrived in my mailbox. A front-page notice announced, Board Treasurer Patricia Winters has resigned for personal reasons. Elections for the vacant position will be held next month. The following weekend, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue. The Patels, Johnsons, Hendersons, and a dozen other families attended. Susan Reynolds brought her famous potato salad. Board member Chen offered the use of his commercial-grade grill for future gatherings. Frank arrived wearing casual clothes instead of his uniform for the first time in decades. "How does retirement feel?" I asked him. He gazed around at the neighbors chatting comfortably, children playing in the yard, and the community coming together without tension or scrutiny. "It feels like justice," he replied with a smile, "the best kind."